Oh my mother! Oh my mother! Oh my mother family! What a beautiful kind of madness Formula One is! Sprint qualifying has just ended, and we have Hamilton on pole, the first mini pole that Hamilton takes at Ferrari. Congratulations, because many had written him off, and none of that. Another one who sort of resurfaced, we could say, was none other than DOOHAN, who finished ahead of Gasly in qualifying. He overdrove, yes, but this time he managed to set the time. That's what overdriving can do. Sometimes it goes badly, and you crash, and sometimes you set a good lap. Despite that, that was not the news from Alpine. The news from Alpine is that it has been the worst team on the grid. We'll see how the car behaved, how DOOHAN was working, and what it means, what's happening at Alpine. And we've been saying it for a while at Sport Maniaticos. Let's go with the summary of what was a qualifying session, where Hamilton has returned to happiness, returned to enlightenment, returned to... Welcome to Sport Maniaticos, the Formula One section on YouTube. Stick around, enjoy, and drop a mega like this big for Sport Maniaticos. How long have we been saying that Alpine has problems? And what did Oliver Oak say? You remember, right? While Briatore was saying he wasn't happy agreeing with us at Sport Maniaticos, Oliver Oak was saying it was a good start. My goodness, my goodness, my goodness. What's coming at Alpine is tremendous, family. It was an absolutely spectacular qualifying session. We started off directly with a very uneasy DOOHAN. Look at the way he took the first corner. It must also be said that aside from being uneasy as always, there was a tailwind in that first corner. And not only he, but many others had problems in the same curve. Look how the car was squirming for DOOHAN, who, we could say, achieved his best qualifying of the 3 races he's had so far. Yes, that's true. The difference compared to Abu Dhabi, for example, is huge. As is the difference with Australia, right? Honestly, he said he was going to calm down, and I think it has worked somewhat, but the problem for Colapinto is not that. I insist that no one think that DOOHAN beating Gasly means this is good for Colapinto. Colapinto is going to stick to the same plans. The problem isn't there, family. The problem is clearly that this car does not work. Notice in the first laps, you could see DOOHAN was uneasy, while the McLarens and Ferraris began showing a pace that they'd have to save for Q3. You'll see, for that Q3. Check this out. On the first attempt, 1 minute 32.931 for Gasly, 2/10 quicker. You can also see it by sectors. In the first sector, DOOHAN is 1/10 faster. In the second, he's 2/10 slower. And in the third, he's 1/10 slower on his first attempt. Pretty even, right? DOOHAN with a Gasly who, I think, looks a bit demotivated. Let me know in the comments, but I see Gasly disheartened. Going from a car in Abu Dhabi that could get podiums to what he has now. And on Alpine social media, he has to see, and I think he didn't even like it, how they compare it to last year's Bahrain in order to hide the disaster that we at Sport Maniaticos have been warning about for so long, right? Incredible, just like Hamilton at that moment. Look how he placed himself in first with Norris second, Verstappen fourth, and Antonelli in a very good 5th position. We saw how Piastri at that moment climbed up, tried to climb up among the top positions while Norris had already finished his lap and was in 3rd. Who was going to be knocked out here? Well, here it was going to be the worst team. Now you'll see how Piastri directly positioned himself where he had to be, in 1st place. Notice how Alonso, with an Aston Martin that also didn't work too well on his first attempt, 132.1, was 2nd. This isn't surprising. It's not that the Aston Martin works well. We know perfectly well that when it's a sprint weekend, the one who benefits is Fernando Alonso. Why? Because that's where his driving skill really shows, knowing how to set up a car quickly, and Alonso does that very fast in FP1 in preparation for qualifying. Plus, he has less disadvantage compared to when other drivers have FP1, FP2, and FP3 to prepare for a qualifying session. I hope that's clearly explained. On the next attempt, Gasly does a 132.6. DOOHAN does a 132.5. DOOHAN puts himself on the second attempt ahead of a Gasly who, as you can see, messed up in the first sector. The tailwind seems to have played him a bad turn. 24.9 versus 24.6, 27.8 versus 27.9. That means Gasly loses 3/10 there. Huge mistake. Here, DOOHAN gains 1/10. He gains on DOOHAN, meaning Gasly is faster. And here, 2/10. In other words, the 3/10 he lost in the first sector, he made up later. That is, if he hadn't made that mistake, DOOHAN would have been behind. But never mind. We'll say it exactly as it happened. DOOHAN ended up in front and qualified better than Gasly. Gasly made the mistake. I showed it to you. But that doesn't matter. DOOHAN did well. And I repeat, this has nothing to do with Colapinto. All of this with Colapinto has his future set. Stay calm. Watch out. The surprise was delivered by Bortoleto to prevent his team from being the worst team on the grid. That's what a good driver does. Why? Because they do have the worst car. But they are not the worst team. Pay attention. Hülkenberg was 19th. Bortoleto was P15. Saved himself and moved on to Q2. Bortoleto. Let's go, Borto. You're amazing. Showing what we already knew. That you're a good driver. Just like Colapinto. And what happened with Alpine's drivers, who ended up behind a worse car. We've shown it in the telemetry many times. DOOHAN 16th, Gasly 17th, 1.3 seconds off and 1.4 seconds off. An infernal, outright disaster that Alpine is living through right now. I can't imagine Briatore saying, but Borto has shown you up. What's going on? Are you drivers or what? Gasly, what's happening there too, right? Because Gasly should have made it through. Williams make it through in 13th and 14th, Sargent ahead, and Antonelli nicely in 7th, Russell 6th, and Fernando Alonso finally ended up 8th, right? So here, those knocked out were DOOHAN, Gasly, Ocon, Hülkenberg, and Lawson. Lawson was a total disaster. Sergio Perez replacement, the one for whom they didn't sign Colapinto at Red Bull for this. You see it? He's knocked out again, committing a serious mistake, we could say. Lawson can't get it together. He apologized to the team, saying he hadn't been able to warm up the tires, right? Look how Lawson is directly making a fool of himself for Red Bull. Tremendous, right? Showing that they made a mistake when they got rid of Sergio Perez, which is the worst team. Who's in last place? Lawson. As the Red Bull? No, because Verstappen saves them. Is it Kick Sauber, who's 19th with Hülkenberg? No, because Bortoleto saves them, finishing 15th. Is it Haas, which also could have been the worst team, right? Why? Because Behrman or Ocon or Behrman, who is a rookie in theory, is saving them. Then who's the worst team? The only one that has both cars among the drivers eliminated in that first qualifying session, SQ1, is DOOHAN and Gasly. That's a catastrophe. Here, you can clearly see Gasly's mistake because Gasly should have advanced. And DOOHAN isn't up to the task, plain and simple. He's no Bortoleto, not even with a better car as far as you look. Bortoleto finished, well, yes, but at least he's doing better than DOOHAN. I repeat, this has nothing to do with Colapinto. Colapinto, oh my goodness. Anyone who has watched Colapinto's 9 races and sees this, please look at what's happening with Kick Sauber. Lawson. I'm really sorry, Lawson said. I'm sorry, I don't have tire temperature. And in SQ2, we suddenly found ourselves with wind problems. A wind that directly wouldn't allow them to drive even faster than in SQ1 sometimes. Piastri moved up into 2nd place, Leclerc took 5th. And in that same attempt, we saw Hamilton place himself in a noteworthy 3rd position, showing that China is a circuit that suits the Englishman very well. A tremendous resurgence. What a burst of brilliance Hamilton had, right? Meanwhile, Fernando Alonso was more in the background than usual, taking 8th place. As SQ2 wrapped up, for the moment SAINZ was in trouble. Look, he was already knocked out in 11th place. And then Albon came and put himself in 7th place. And Stroll was 9th. Notice, Albon pushes Sainz out, and Stroll pushes Alonso out, who ends up 11th, knocked out. That is Alonso, Berman, excellent Sainz, who finished 13th, saying he had issues. Bortoleto in 14th, who couldn't do any more. And Hadjar, who had cleared SQ1 at least, went back to making a mistake. A tailwind error, heavily at fault in turn 1. But for instance, much more pronounced than the correction DOOHAN had, right? A disaster, really. Both drivers from the Red Bull Junior team. This is the most disastrous thing in Red Bull's history, without a doubt, in terms of drivers they've promoted. Albon goes through, Stroll goes through. And what do we find? That Sainz tells you the car is badly balanced, that the seat is coming loose, and well, Hadjar remains 15th in the end. Alonso, Berman, Sainz, Bortoleto, Hadjar are knocked out. Norris sets the best time with a Mercedes that looked promising, with Russell, Piastri, Hamilton, Antonelli in 5th, which is decent, and Verstappen in 6th. The Red Bull still didn't seem to fully click, but it was going to click, as Verstappen often shows us, by setting the lap on the very last second. SQ3. Norris in 2nd place, while we saw Russell move up to 2nd too, overtaking Norris, who hadn't had a good attempt. He had to make corrections, and look how Hamilton did manage to get himself provisional pole. They were going for one shot. Some tried to do 2 laps, Notice Leclerc put himself in 3rd, behind Piastri. Russell had already done his lap and returned to the pits. Both Mercedes drivers, Russell and Antonelli, ended up 4th and 6th. Meanwhile, McLaren did not give up, and on a 2nd attempt, Piastri moved up to 2nd. Then came Norris, with the best 1st sector, improving in the 2nd sector. He was on track for an easy pole. And what happened, family? Again, he failed in the 3rd sector. Norris is not at the level, I'm sorry to say, I wanted to see Norris contending, and this is going to be crazy to watch because it's a much faster car than the rest. For now, Piastri put him in his place today, and then Verstappen came to take 2nd, his rival. Look at the front row, Hamilton, Verstappen, and absolute madness. Tsunoda took 8th place, a P8 that bumped Albon down to 9th and Stroll to 10th, 1.133 off. Unbelievable. If Stroll managed to slip into SQ3, at least give us a good lap, give us some excitement, but no. The Aston Martins will start 10th and 11th. Much better, at least, than the team that was undoubtedly the worst team on the grid today, the Alpine team. We hope 2 people are taking note of this, these 2 who will come up on screen now. After DOOHAN caused a red flag in free practice, we have Colapinto and Briatore. I think Colapinto has a lot to say in this whole story. Maximum madness at Ferrari. Obviously, Hamilton was going to take a pole or 2, but so soon. Everyone had written him off. And I say they had, because I knew perfectly well that Hamilton has a very high level of driving. What I didn't expect, honestly, was that we'd get to the 2nd Grand Prix and he'd set a mini pole. Pole ahead of Verstappen by 0.018. Tomorrow, things are going to blow up. No tailwind is needed, family. Tomorrow the showdown is Hamilton's tail against Verstappen's, with 2 rockets each because neither will yield. 3rd is Piastri, 4th Leclerc. Good for Piastri, holding things together and nearly taking pole, 0.080. Leclerc ended up far behind, 0.208, losing steam compared to Hamilton. It's going to be a year where Hamilton will shine a lot at Ferrari, so Leclerc should be worried, as should the Mercedes drivers who pitted, and I don't know why, because they ended up 5th, even though they could have improved. Antonelli, 7th, in between them. Norris with 2 mistakes. Mercedes had 1 shot. Norris had 2. 2 mistakes. Double blunder by Lando. Ando Norris for now in China. Tsunoda and Albon, then Stroll complete the top 10. Tidbits, Hamilton without question, the Alpine debacle. At least we can say they've hit rock bottom because you can't go lower than being the worst team on the grid.